I think we'll go ahead and get started while people are filtering in. Wow, this microphone works pretty well, it sounds like. I feel like screaming. Okay, good. Well, thanks so much today for coming to today's K-Club on Kiss of Death, Mistakes, and Grantsmanship. I think it's a really fantastic panel discussion. We'll give you a little bit of context first on the peer review process, because that's sort of the form that we're going to be using to discuss this very important topic. Before we get started, though, I just want to go ahead and do our tradition of drawing for the limited edition K-Club mug. So, as you all know, we highly value your input and want to make sure that the topics that we present are in line with what your needs are, and they meet those needs. At the end of the session, you receive a survey. I'll be very grateful for you to give us feedback on today's session and suggest any future sessions that you really want to hear us address and talk about. So everyone who responds to the survey and puts their name gets added to the Crown Royale bag for drawing the next month for the K-Club. So this is from the September session. I'll go ahead and give me honors. Yeah. Oh. Well, interestingly, I don't have a name, but I have an Emory Net ID. So it's ncrook2 at emory.edu. Is ncrook2 here? Well, I'm sure Barbara will deliver this to ncrook2 after. Thank you, ncrook2, for your feedback. All right. The other quick housekeeping item I wanted to point out is we sometimes try to put in a K-Club special, we call them, just a little funding opportunity that might be of interest to you. And today I selected one that's not research funding specific, but I wanted you to all know, for the Emory faculty in the audience, the Emory Center for Scholarly, for Faculty Development offers $2,500 mini grant for help with writing, including grant writing. So we all know Dr. Janet Gross on the panel. If you don't, we'll introduce her in a moment. So, for example, she offers grant consultations, so the person may be her, or there's other types of editing as well. But the money's there till it's gone, so it's available, and you can look up the CFDE website if you're interested in learning more. I did also want to mention, before we get started, when I walked in, I noticed that there's a big Georgia CTSA poster. And the Georgia CTSA is one of our really important sponsors. The K-Club was started by Department of Pediatrics in 2009. Since then, Department of Medicine has become a co-sponsor, the Center for AIDS Research, as well as the Georgia CTSA. So we really thank them for their sponsorship and contributing speakers and providing lunch for everyone. So thanks to all our co-sponsors. Today's panelists are pretty excited by the panel that we've assembled to really kind of give you an insider's view onto this topic. They're all grant reviewers, grant writers. They represent a variety of perspectives. Luann Brown is professor of neonatology. She's also the director of the Office of Postdoctoral Education here at Emory. She's a big science researcher. She's had a variety of people come, trainees and junior faculty come through her lab, including PhD and MD fellows. Dr. Trent Spencer is the director of the Cell and Gene Therapy Center here at Emory and in AFLAC. He has also a basic science lab, and he, importantly, is the mentor to two of our K-12 scholars, funded scholars who are on our pediatric-specific K-12. Janet Gross, who I think probably almost everyone here should know, is the grant writing consultant course director for the Emory MSCR grant and scientific writing class. Dr. Gross is what I call our secret weapon when it comes to Ks. She has a tremendous amount of knowledge as it relates to K applications. Many of you probably have worked with her directly. She just is basic science, clinical science, outcomes research, so she kind of represents the full unit when it comes to grant writing, and she's probably seen more grant reviews than everyone in this room combined, quite possibly. So really happy to have her here as well today. And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that Neil Weissman, who if you've seen him on a K-Club panel before, he's quite entertaining and very knowledgeable. And he couldn't be here today, but he was very kind to send me some input information as it relates to this panel that I've interwoven into the discussion, as you'll see. So, brief outline of today's session is, first I want to spend a couple of minutes just setting the stage, because the way that we've designed today's session with the help of Luann Brown was instrumental in helping us figure out the best format to kind of present these kiss of death, mistakes, and grantsmanship, is we're centering it around the NIH peer review process, or the peer review process of NIH grant applications. So really thinking through, when you submit your application, the kind of feedback that you get as a result of that process, and what are the clues in that let you know if you have one of those kiss of death, mistakes, and grantsmanship. Go over the review process just ever so briefly. And we'll launch into the panel discussion. We'll kind of do like a case study where we'll show examples of reviewers' comments, and then our panel will give their input as to if they think it's kiss of death or not. And even if it is there any way to address it, or is it just you got it from scratch kind of thing. This is a big crowd, but really welcome audience input. If you have questions, or if we don't touch upon maybe a review that you or your friend somebody you know has received, and you want to throw that out there at the panel, now would be a great time to do that. So, as promised, I'm just going to give you just a really high-level overview of the review process to really set the context of the discussion into place. So first, you'll submit your NIH grant application via grants.gov. Typically, it's processed by the Center for Scientific Review. Ks are a little bit different, but the concept is still the same. It's input in, and it's assigned to a study section. They'll assign a primary, a secondary, and often a tertiary reviewer. And these people will be the people who will read your entire application from beginning to end. They'll assess the strengths and weaknesses, and they'll assign scores in several areas, and they'll provide the written comments that you'll eventually receive that support their scores. The top 50% typically of applications will be what we call discussed. So as long as if you're ranked in the top 50%, the entire study section, so the primary, secondary, tertiary reviewer plus a dozen or other people in the room will discuss your application. The primary reviewer will say what they liked about it, what they didn't, why they scored it the way they did. The second reviewer will then chime in and say if they agree or disagree. Tertiary will do the same thing. And then a whole group discussion will ensue. And you can imagine that some of these probably get pretty lively, right? Especially if there's a disagreement between the reviewers. At the conclusion of that discussion, all the reviewers in the room will score your application. And so, especially if it's a lively discussion, if there's discourse between what the reviewers thought, new information can come from that discussion that's even more beneficial to your grant application. And so if you're so lucky to have your grant discussed, whether or not it's not funded, the scientific review officer in the room will create a written summary of that discussion highlighting the key points. So I really wanted to highlight here, we've got the written reviews and written summary that we received back, and these are where the clues are hidden, or maybe not so hidden, about what the kisses of death might be in your grant application. So whether you're discussed or not, you'll receive the initial reviews from the primary, secondary, tertiary reviewers, so that's a gift in and of itself, but then if you're discussed, you'll have this summary discussion about what sort of the debate was. At that point, you're going to have a decision. So if you're not funded, you have to rethink about, am I going to submit, am I not, did I just miss the pay line? If so, how am I going to address what's seeming not that much of an issue? Or if there's some really significant concerns, do I scrap the whole thing and start over, or do I resubmit? If you do resubmit, how do you satisfy those reviewers? Because after all, they just called you ugly, right? So here's the criticisms, here's everything they hated about you, your mentors, your research plan. So as we've often talked about in K-Club, got to take a couple steps back, put away, maybe grab a glass of wine, really distance yourself, remove the emotion from it, and think about how you'd want to address this. I want us to take a quick moment to talk about how you want to think through and address the reviewer comment. I compiled this list, in fact, from a School of Medicine session that they had a couple of weeks ago where they did a mock review session. Did anyone here go to that mock review session by show of hands? In fact, you were so excellent on the review panel, Philip. I really enjoyed your presentation on that. But I thought it was a really great session, really gave some wonderful insights into the review session, and it was staffed by senior faculty as well as junior faculty, really get a flavor for what the grant review was like. And Neil Weitzman was one of the people that did the overview. And so from the discussion and from him, I got these sort of do and do nots when it comes to responding to reviews. So do not lecture the reviewers or study section for missing something or not understanding your point of view very easily. It's easy to do, I think. You don't want to be argumentative or saying, I respectfully disagree, because really that's just disagreeing with a fancy word in front. You really, in fact, this is a little counterintuitive, but you don't want to flatter or effusively thank the reviewers or study section, because you can easily become a sycophant, I think, in a case like that. What you do want to do is, like I said, take that step back, really understand the reviewer's point of view. In this case, it's almost like the customer's always right. If they didn't get it, if you shouted it, you thought that you articulated it really, really well, that's still your fault. Something about the way you presented it didn't make a connection to them. Really set the emotion aside. If the grant was discussed, you really dive into that discussion summary and pull out the clues and make sure that whatever's in that discussion summary, that's what you touch upon. And then really using data and credible references to substantiate your opinion and statement. I wanted to share this with you because I think it really sets the framework for how we think about these kids of death mistakes, and if they are salvageable, putting the framework of this is how you need to be thinking forward, sort of beginning with the end in mind. One more thing I want to touch upon before we frame this, to help frame the discussion. You know, this is K Club, so we're going to talk about the review criteria for a K, which are these 5 areas. So, you as the applicant, the career development plan that you've put together to fulfill sort of the gap of, you know, you're ready to apply for your R because you're doing something, right? So whatever the career development plan is to get you that extra career development so that you can become an independent researcher. The research plan, ever so important, still in this case, mentor and mentor team, and then the environment and the institutional commitment to you. These are the 5 areas that the primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewers will review. And if you're lucky enough to be discussed, then you'll generate this overall impact score. So one more brief point before we dive into the panel discussion. Over here, of course, is the K grant review criteria that just mentioned and went over. I did want to mention, for those of you who maybe aren't going to go for a K, I think this discussion is still relevant to you, but I just wanted to put side by side our review criteria, and this was a great suggestion by Janet. I shared the slides with her this weekend, just to say that in the K, once the research plan is actually then morphed into significance, innovation, and approach. You still sort of have the candidate, the investigator, the environment, but no longer in an R is this part or this part relevant. Instead, this is what it morphs into. Any questions about the review process or the framework that we've just set up before we dive into getting expertise and input from our panel? Okay, so here's number 1, and the way I'd like to do this is a little bit of an experiment, but I put up a couple of reviewer comments. They're sort of thematically aligned for each slide, but most of them just actually have one reviewer comment. Many of these are real reviewer comments with any personalized information stripped out. And put the review criteria down here, and just to get kind of a level of engagement from the group, I'd like you to tell me, we'll read through each of these and tell me which of these 5 areas you think this really kind of hones in on. So in this example 1, we've got a couple of examples statements. So the reviewer said there is no evidence in the application that the mentor has sufficient research funds that will be available to complete the work described during the proposed funding. And then kind of similarly, despite her excellent credentials, the lead mentor is not the recipient of active NIH research grants. So just shout it out. Which do you think that this touches upon, 1 through 5? 4? Yep, I agree. Also what? Yeah, I mean, you're right. That part is into that a little bit more, but I think you're right. I also think here the environment and institutional commitment to the candidate, because it's not clear, especially that first one, are there funds available? Ks don't come with that much money, right? So it's really questionable. You can't do it on the K alone, so maybe if you have a startup package or something like that. But I'd like to turn it over to the panel now at this point, and please talk into the microphones because we're projecting this via WebEx and also record it for future reference. But I'd like to get your input on if you think that this is a kiss of death mistake, and if so, how would you go about addressing it?
There's no doubt that it's a kiss of death, and I've written very similar remarks on grants that I've had, but it is fixable if the mentor has other grants available. So just because it's not showing up on an NX bio, there can be other funds available to the investigator or to the institution, and spelling those out would be important. So in this case, the overall point that needs to be made is that this grant was written in a way that it allowed the reviewer to write this comment. And I think that's important to understand, is that you don't want to give the reviewer the ammunition to write something like this. So from the very beginning, knowing that there needs to be money in addition to the K, you have to understand that. And if the person doesn't have NIH funding, that's okay as long as there's other funding available. So if you would spout out and say, here is the available funding, which I think we do reasonably well here, in which that's very easily, that I would be surprised. I'm surprised that this is from one of our grants, because I would think we're pretty good at catching things like that. So you don't want to give the reviewer something like this to say, because it is a negative, it's a study section, and then it just snowballs. And when this grant, the other thing you have to understand is that this grant is going to be reviewed with all the other grants, and the next guy in line is going to have theirs set up, and they're going to have their all their ducks in a row, and if they do and you don't, we're not comparing grant to grant, we're just giving this grant a score, that grant a score, but in reality, in our minds, we're reviewing on that this grant is better than that grant, so when you get to the study section, you can kind of understand which ones are going to be the top and which ones aren't, and little things like this, it's just too easy of a red flag to point out.
So when we go through our checklist about who is a good candidate for submitting a K award, one of the criteria I call stable financial environment, and that's exactly what this is. So really important from our perspective to cover bases and convey that you are in a stable financial environment, and that many things go with that, and this is just one of the problems in terms of your main mentor's primary funding. And in the variety of ways. And it's really important to kind of have that checklist, go through it, and do stuff. Agreed. At the end of the day, if there's not enough money for you to do what you propose, that's a kiss of death. So another alternative is perhaps this is the mentor where you really want to learn something very specific, but perhaps funding is a little limited at this moment in time. Or the other possibility is that the mentor has too many trainees, and they did not specify that there was enough money to go around. So that's another reason that comment can come up. And in that case, if there's not enough funds or a little dicey or insecure, then find a co-mentor who can also, A, have fun, but B, also be important in your training so that you're going to go learn procedure, protocol, get training, and XYZ, and that's this co-mentor over here. And then the question about funding becomes less important.
Another comment, because the opposite is also a problem sometimes. If the mentor has too much money, if you get into the study section, it's like, are we going to give them another grant, or do we want to give this other person who has less money some of this money? And it's, again, the psychology of the study section. You'd be surprised at some of the discussions that go on during study section, or the things that are just not really verbalized. And it's it's just understood that, okay, this guy's 10 NIH grants, we don't really need to give him another one. So that's an issue also. And some of us who have some NIH funding and other funding, you wouldn't put some of that other institutional funding on support, on your other support, because you just don't want to overwhelm them, because that's the idea that they've got funding. And so that's the opposite coin, but it's still important.
That's so interesting to me, Trent, that you mentioned that, because at this mock grant review I was talking about, Carlos Del Rio played the study section chair, and he said, and I quote, "We are not allowed to use the F word here," and by that he meant funding. And he said that in the study section you're not supposed to you're not evaluating whether it's funded or not, because that council's choice, but it still sounds like it sort of trickles in.
So you say you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to mention funding, which we don't, but it does end up in that final score when all is said and done and you kind of put your head down and put your score in. That can come into play. The other aspect is like R21 that says you don't need preliminary data, but you do. So the other guys can have preliminary data. So some of these things that are not allowed, they do creep into your psyche.
Investigators who are trying to decode their rules, and then there's competitive advantage. So let's say for the R21 is that you don't need preliminary data. However, if you have it, it's a competitive advantage. This is a competitive process. There's a rule that you don't need to include the biosketches and your collaborators and contributors. I've seen a summary sheet that did not complain, and they were not included. There are rules that we will ignore, and that's why we have kind of sourcing available that we have based on people's experience with the process. So it's good to kind of understand what's on behind.
Any questions, comments before we move on to our second case study? That was really some great, insightful information. Actually, I forgot, I put a couple of things up here. This is my own stream of consciousness. I think we touched upon much of this. The one thing I'll say that I don't think we touched upon, however, is usually Luann wisely mentioned that adding a co-mentor might be wise in a case like this. But I've always heard, and again, I don't think this is set in stone, but good rule of thumb is that the main mentor has to be the funded one. And NIH is typically that's the gold standard. It does.
And so a lot of, if you've got a really strong candidate and they really like the training plan and they really like the research plan, and then they say, well, look, this is an opportunity for this trainee to start off in an independent trajectory. You can highlight that. Then money question becomes, the money becomes less important.
Okay.
And another comment related to that as well. Since we'll give mentors, we'll kind of qualify what kind of mentor we're talking about. So a mentor with less money might be a career mentor. A lab with money is a primary scientific mentor. And we describe the mentoring team as kind of a co-mentoring team with Dr. X, the clinician who you did your fellowship training with, who may be primarily a clinician, gives you access to clinical samples and facilitates enrollment of patients, et cetera. And they decide to go into Luann's lab and you have a well-funded basic science lab. You're not going to spend the rest of your career with her. You're going to spend the rest of your career doing what the primary mentor does. But that person doesn't have the funded research environment. Just be really clear and paint the picture for the reviewer, get their sympathy and their understanding, and get them to say, wow, this is a great plan. Money's here. Careership's here. This is a great plan. We get it. That's great. That's the thoroughness and the completeness of the story. So a naive reviewer says, I get it. That makes total sense to me.
Same line, that when you're going to have co-mentors, each of you talk about how often you're going to meet with each person, and when are the three of you going to get in the same room and talk about things? Because that's a teamwork approach for your career advancement. And if you don't highlight that, then they think, oh, well, they're just going to spend all their time in the place that has money and not take advantage of this other opportunity. You need to show there's dynamic.
You have the ideal situation. You may not ever meet every month with each one of them, but just in the room, doesn't need to leave this room, just say you're going to.
You need to reject that out of the recording, Barbara.
Yeah, everyone else is saying it in the application. If you don't, and if you're not clear on what each co-mentor is doing, it's so easy for the reviewer to look at it and say, yes, you have mentor and co-mentor. There's co-mentor. You don't say what the co-mentor is doing. There's 3 or 4. And you got to 3 or 4 off your study. So you're going to be scored from 1 to 9 or whatever. Seldom go up to 5 or 6. But you just got to keep the 3s and 4s off your score sheet. And some of these is just playing games does not allow us to give you a 3 or a 4.
That's all really awesome advice and input. All right, let's move to example 2. The problem is not well-defined, documented, or understandable. Kiss of death. So what, oh, I just gave away. What review criteria does this touch upon? Number 3? What else? So did somebody else say number 4? I mean, number 4 too, right? Because it's really kind of the mentor's issue. I already gave my own opinion, kiss of death, yes or no. What do you say, panel?
This is what the other reviewer said. This is where you say, I respectfully disagree. It's one of those points, but if one.
Yeah, but in that case, one person may think that, and in the study section that I said, you have to start with a 5. 5 will never get you $. Use the F word. They won't get you $. A 5 will never get you $. And one person may think that, and the other person may think something different. But the bottom line is, you planted a negative seed, and the rest of the people sitting in that room will be somewhere in the middle. So not well defined. It's both. It is, the research is not really well developed, not well thought out, has been reviewed, critically, and also says the mentor didn't really pay a whole lot of attention. So that means, that raises the question about how is this mentor going to be for you? If they take the time to pay attention to your research plan, you're not going to get a whole lot of long career development from somebody like that.
And could this just be a problem with grantsmanship, that you didn't define your problem?
No.
So if this was an R grant, it would be not scored because the research plan is flawed. In A, it just completely undermines the purpose of the K grant. So the K grant reflects the mentoring that is about to come. And everyone on the committee is mentors. Very high standards. Not only are they mentors, but they are volunteering a tremendous amount of time to be on this committee. So they hold the mentors that they're reading about to a very high standard. And this would be insulting to people who have come to the committee to review these K grants. And frequently when they're reviewing the mentor section, they'll state it's unclear that the mentor had significant involvement in the preparation.
So suspend disbelief for just a moment. It could be that the research plan and the games are rock solid tight. Impact is really low because they don't know what they're solving. I mean, that's true because it's the problem is not well defined. ever seen a grant like that, where it was just basically like, yeah, you can do this, this will all work, but so what?
Yes, all the time.
And so if that's the case, if it really is just that they defined the problem statement, they didn't compel you to think that this was really an issue worth researching, is that can you salvage that? Is there a way to infuse lots of great grantsmanship to salvage that?
So when I see a grant that's all about the what and not about the why, that often can be a grant writing issue. And we kind of regroup and we say, okay, well, why is this important? Not what are you doing. That's usually explained. So why is this important? And a lot of times people can't give me a good enough answer. And if you know why what you're doing is important, you are not writing the literature, you don't know what the priorities of your funder are, you haven't gone on to reporters to see what else is being funded by this institute and what they care about, or the kind of endpoints that this institute is interested in funding, all those things. You need to wow me with all of that in significance of why is your work important.
The other piece of that is, so in the study section, 3 people read it in depth. But at the same time, while those people are talking, the other people in the room are listening, reading your specific Amos page. And if it's not really clear what this is about, they're going to go with a more negative person. And so 4 keeps getting a little worse and worse and worse. But if the significance is really clear and one person is arguing, I really get it, this is important, da-da-da-da-da-da, they go with a more positive person. It not only needs to be clear throughout, but it really needs to be clear in specific Amos page.
You said something interesting that I somewhat disagree with, is that the 3 reviewers have read it in depth. So a lot of times you'll get there and you're like, when I read your grant, it'll take maybe days to review one grant, and it just takes a long time, but you'll get the study section, and it's clear that the other reviewers did not spend time reviewing the grant like they maybe should have, and that's when you get this. Because I skimmed it, I don't get it, and I didn't like it from page 1, and then on. When you bring out your grants, they can be this stack of papers you have to review. You have 8 or 9 grants to review, which we're getting more and more. It's really burdensome. It's a lot of information to read. So this person may have just skimmed it, didn't get it, and moved on to the next one. So you can't assume they're going to read it in depth, but you got to hook them from the beginning. And you come with the innovation and significance. And when you move from the K to the R, the innovation becomes a separate sport. But it's important here because that's what we all review. We're all in the mindset of physics, as you were saying. You have that hook from the beginning because it's interested in reading the grant. Or sure something. The next grant's going to be sure something. The grant's going to be sure something.
So I think that the Amos page is often called the most important page, and your problem statement should be in that very first paragraph. Why should I care? And I think that this is a couple of thoughts I had about it, and the very last point was from Neil Weitzman. If you wouldn't use your own money to fund the research, because it's your tax dollars, honestly, you may want to think about a different problem to address, or you may want to think about a different way to explain why this is so important. What's the gap? What's the problem? Why should people care? Why should your grandma think this is an important thing to invest in with her tax dollars? Moving on to example 3. The games do not match the problem statement and are not specific or measurable. Moreover, aim 2 cannot be accomplished if aim 1 is not successfully accomplished first. So, any thoughts on what review criteria reflects upon? 3, thank you. And 4, yeah, honestly. So I think that, again, this is good. We're just mimicking what we just talked about. But have you ever seen an aim with a grant with interdependent aims that's been funded? Happen, right? Instant. I mean, they always call that the kiss of death. But yet I do see examples given of specific aims pages where they're interdependent. And I think, how can that be?
So, I'm kind of thinking from my own reviews, and the grant is really good, and the aims are really good, and the problem is really good, and there's some interdependence. You let it slide in some instances, but again, as Luann was saying, you start with the 5. If there's interdependence on the games, it's such an easy thing to ding a grant on. So it's just too easy to say aim 1 is dependent on aim 2, and then you start with your 5, and if it's not really solid grant, it's just a softball. We have the break point tonight. It's just a hanging slider. It's too easy to write.
It's particularly true in the study section that I sit in for K. They did aim 1 and it didn't work, then the training element becomes really complicated. And then by having to be completely dependent on 1, it can be partially dependent, and the answer for aim 1 is yes, and I'm going to do this. The answer to aim 1 is no, and I'm going to do that. You've got a caveat, and you can move forward, but if it is solely dependent on aim 1, and if it's no, from a training perspective, it has limited value.
So I just wanted to see examples of clinical research, because we have a lot of people here doing scale 2s and 32s and things like that, collecting preliminary data in the clinical environment. And then A is to expand what they have found. Maybe they saw a small signal and they're going to expand it in aim 1. And then go on in aim 2, building on what they have indicated they will replicate in aim 1 from what they found in their earlier pilot study. If you have good preliminary data, you can convince a reviewer, just like Trent has said, this looks good, this is going. You already demonstrated you can recruit 50 people with this unusual condition. You can get spinal tap from 75 people. You can get families to consent to do X, Y, Z. And finding makes sense. So aim 1, and you are going to expand what you found in your pilot data in aim 1, and then you go on maybe to develop a treatment or something else. An example is if your preliminary data is cross-sectional and then aim 1 is a longitudinal aim. There's a high likelihood that you're going to replicate what you found in cross-sectional. And then you can go on in aim 2 and build aim 2 and 3 based on what you found in your pilot data. But that requires a lot of organization and a very compelling writing style to say, you don't say, I might do this, I might find this. You say, we are largely convinced based on my primary data and the 7 publications that have come out of my laboratory in the past. My mentor is an expert in doing this, and then you go to plan A, plan B, plan C. Because you'll never get to the second year and say, ooh, what am I going to do with my money? I can't do anything I said I was going to do. All the reviewers already can think all this through the 5-year plan and say, you're going to hit a wall. What are you going to do with the money? I'm not going to give you 5 years of money today because you haven't given me a 5-year plan. So you do it. You just have to build a really good case. You have to spend a lot of time explaining it and anticipating that this is going to be criticism. And then you have the criticism. You say, we use words like we anticipate, we expect. You demonstrate when you show data. The reason for no, you can't do it, and there are ways around it.
I appreciate your logical thought progression, Janet. It's super helpful in cases like this. Any questions about this one? A tricky one. Okay. So I think that the thing that I kind of thought about was the sort of unclear significance equals focus goals with unclear aims, and really thinking about your specific aims page. There's tons of information about specific aims out on the internet, different grant writing workbooks. You should be spending hours on this thing, and it's really iterative. The other thing that I've seen successful is if you do what we call in Pediatrics a specific club, where you bring together your entire mentor team and you just hash it out and you talk through your aims and you have them poke holes in it and you have your box of tissues there just in case, and it can be really effective. And you know, I wanted to talk about this one because I did always hear independent aims were the kiss of death, and so I really am grateful to you all for kind of putting that in perspective. And yes, but there are ways to kind of get around that. Okay, I put this one in here because it's ever common. The amount of work is overambitious for the allotted time period of the proposed grant. What do you think it speaks to? Which of these review criteria? Awake, but so it's rich plan, right? Too much work in a short period of time, and really, everything comes back in a K to the mentors, right? The mentors really should have caught that. Yes. Oops.
In K awards,
Use the microphone.
people are putting way too much coursework. The reviewers get blown away by, oh my God, you're going to be doing 10 credits a semester. How are you ever going to get any of this research done? The time management and getting incredible time, merging your didactic training, your meetings, your writing, and then all the you have to do 25% social time. Is that 25% social time convincing A, or does no one believe that someone in your subspecialty can have 75% second time, except for that, all influences whether or not people think you can get your research done.
I'm glad you brought that up because it reminds me of a debate we had in K Club. About 5 years ago, we had a panel, and there was a real disagreement of whether or not a degree granting program was appropriate to have in a K career development plan. And the answer is it depends, it sounds like, based on what's palatable to that study section in that institute. So if you do want to propose getting an MSCR or something like that in your K, you definitely ought to check with the program officer to see if that's something they're interested in.
And to ask about time allotment as well, because I think it is critical if you propose you're going to do all this. There's only 24 hours a day. They need to be sure that you can accomplish it. That's really the question that they're asking. Can you accomplish it?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question about specificity that you would put into that sort of sense. To say, I have looked at the Emory graduate course catalog and I'm going to take class 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Versus saying additional training in biostatistics and I'm going to take courses at the graduate.
I have seen it in multiple ways. But the one I personally like best as a reviewer that I think is the Western uses, a timetable. So here's the spring, summer, and then you can say little X's, right? Course X, Y, Z, 2019, and then you say, well, I'm going to try to do all the courses at the same time. So it in a framework that looks logical. It's what you're trying to do. It's a logical progression, and yes, I have time. If you just list them, then you have time.
I think the specificity is probably a little better. It doesn't take too many more letters. Sentences to be specific, and then it's all criticism. It's going to take you knowledge, well, which is going to be knowledge. Yes. Specific, it opens up potential discussion. But I hate that comment. It's ubiquitous in the sense that somebody's going to say, well, you're too ambitious. But one here might be Superman and let him go.
But doesn't it also speak to whether or not they're realistic?
Well, really versus overly ambitious. A lot of us are ambitious, so we want to do a lot.
That's a good point. Oh, ambition, that's kind of a, yeah.
So you have to have a good logical, a good rationale for why you're proposing to do what you're going to do. But just working on a KOA with someone who really one is the most qualified wrote in his writing training that he's going to take Grants 101 and attend the K Club. And I'm like, you could teach the K Club at this point. And so you have to, you don't want to like just gratuitously throw things in. You're not going to take Biostats 101. You have a completed the MSCR program and you're going to get advanced training in very special, narrow area expertise, and you're going to, it's kind of like slip in a little bit of something off, but it's appropriate, I think.
Yep, that is, so they can serve as a panelist next time.
But I also say it needs to be really clear how this is going to help your career and your research trajectory. If it looks like, oh yeah, I want to go take immunology, but yet you haven't talked about, some applications which are real life, which says, I'm this, I need this, I need to learn this in order to be that. And so I'm going to okay, I got it. So trying to make it clear why it's important that you do it and what you hope to gain and how it's going to promote your independent research.
Really well said, just breaking it down to the most basic, simple concepts. A plus B equals C.
Right.
Yeah. So I just want to point this out because I thought it was so funny. This is the amount of time is over ambitious, so getting back to like putting too much into your aims. This last comment here was a direct quote from Neil Weitzman. If you know him, you can put it into his South African accent. You're risking disaster squeezing in 3 or having dozens of sub-aims. I have to review a good 4-aim proposal. Keep it simple with all the exclamation points, of course. But I think that he was interestingly reviewing grants at the time that he provided us this content for this session. So he clearly was feeling quite passionate that this was a death mistake. Our example 5. So this is a huge one, and we've already touched upon this some, but I'll give you 3 different comments that were from 3 different views. It is not clear if the project described in the research plan originated from the candidate or is an extension of the mentor's work. Second, it is unclear how this proposal creates an independent research trajectory. Third, there is no logical next step for future research outlined. And I think they all kind of, come into the same issue. It's the candidate, it's the career development plan, it's the research plan, it's the mentors, and it's the environment. This is not showing that this K is going to lead to independent research career. And I know we've talked about in the K Club before, this is a really tough needle to thread, right? Because you're working with your mentor, they are your mentor, you have to have something in common with them, but yet you have to be creating your own kind of bubble around what you're going to do, and the mentor has to agree that this is going to be yours when you're all done. So, esteemed panel, how do you overcome this challenge?
You need to know what you want to be when you grow up. And because at the end of the day, you do not want to compete against your mentor funding. It's understanding my background gives me this, and I'm going to be different from my mentor because I already have this background. Or you have a mutual agreement, maybe your backgrounds are similar, but you have a mutual agreement. They're going to take this road, I'm going to take this road. It's in your training plan, it's in your mentor's letter. Also highlighting how I'm going to differentiate between them because it is this is a training for future career development. Anyway.
So I problem most frequently with K99 grants. Where people, some roles are applying for grant funding to sustain their position in their life, doing what they've been doing. And a lot is following the direction of the mentor and the mentor's work, as opposed to essentially veering off in a new direction. And the premise of the K99, the new aims, kind of infusion of kind of scientific direction and a clear separation from the get-go thing. It comes from the lab and mentor data could be yours, could be from other people's labs, but your aims are your direction. And if the mentor is not in support of that, the K is not. So I'm kind of understand that immediately. And you don't need permission to put in a kicker in it, you just do it. So sometimes if a review comes back like this, my interpretation that there was no agreement in the beginning of the ground that this was to establish an opinion.
Do you think you need to sit down and have that crucial conversation with your mentor at that point?
There's overlap, otherwise you're going to get example number
Yeah.
6 that you're doing something that's not the mentor's the mentor's help with. So there's going to be overlap, and whether there's passing parallel or perpendicular, I think it is. I think as well that you have to sit down and actually spell it out and make sure in the mentor's letter that the mentor spells out that yes, this is the action is different from mine, yes, we have overlap, and we will together to achieve.
It's an opportunity to hire, perhaps a co-mentor might be another way to kind of nudge it in a slightly different direction, and so that getting background training from both people kind of take you on the same path.
Good suggestion. I think the only other thing I thought about is to, in your career development plan, specify where you're going to publish and where you're going to be senior author, for example. You really want to say, I'm going to publish this papers in this year, 2 as first author, 1 as senior author, and then outlining your R01 grant application and thinking through what those aims might be is a really good way to delineate, like, this is going to be mine. And that seems like it should be sort of rock solid. And I have seen Ks that not gone the steps to say what they were going to, when they were going to apply for R01 funding and what it was going to be on, and that's, I think, probably a no-brainer to put that in, don't you think? I did want to talk about this one, and we touched upon it, but I think it's really important. So, no preliminary data presented. It's actually not required in a K either, right? But I liked what you said. There's the rules, and then there's the competitive advantage. You know, with this, I think that, are you really ready, right, as the candidate if you haven't presented your preliminary data? And it also speaks to the research plan. But have you seen a K that's funded without preliminary data? Is there a way to, okay, if you have no preliminary data, you're not ready. Is that the, okay, so this is truly the kiss of death. Moving along. No.
As it started at 5, editors will have preliminary data. The ones that get closer to the dollars given are. And so not having preliminary data says pre-work. A little longer.
Does it be published?
No. No.
I think that this one should be publications, because I'm not sure that I've seen successful grants like this that don't have publications. In fact, just the last section I was on, we were looking at a guy that had mid-authorships in cell papers and deciding what to do on those cell papers. And I was just scratching my head like, the guy had cell papers and a couple first author papers, and we're going to question the guy's ability to do this work. So yeah, it goes beyond just preliminary data. Then your competition is going to have preliminary data. You have to assume they're going to have papers. You're going to have to assume they have papers and impact journals that are reasonably impactful for your field, at least the societal journals with impact factors, driver, a couple. So I think it goes well beyond the data. I think at one point in time, you can get by with it. But now, your competition, they started in high school. In high school, I cloned whatever it was.
So the other is that you're applying for a K award from the top tier research institution. So there's almost no excuse for not having take advantage of some opportunity somewhere to run some project. This shows preliminary data that supports your capacity or your capability to do a certain kind of science or a certain kind of experiment. And then as it becomes more of a competitive advantage, you show preliminary data that is directly in support of your research aims and your hypothesis. and you clearly tell the reviewer why you're showing them two different signs. You must have the last, but you do have the former, and you are a trainee, and if you have great bias sketch, you might be given a break for having clear data, maybe not directly relevant, but demonstrating that you're a good bet, you're a good in bet.
It's not feasibility for the research plan as it would be in our, it's feasibility as you as a candidate.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So remember, and you're going to be looked as a candidate coming from an institution like this. There are candidates coming from institutions that have level. They don't have, you know, Google Emory core facilities. There are pages of them. And institutions that don't have that. So reviewers know what the resources and opportunities for solving alternative things in research are here, and you have to, as we said, there are all these institutional K-12 and KL2s. So if you have no preliminary data, maybe you need to be looking at the institutional data.
Just one other comment to Trent's point is the question about, yes, you're going to need all these publications. The question is, do you need specifically preliminary data on what you're talking about right here? And ship it at FDA, is it ready for a paper? Because that can sometimes, like, how? It says you're ready to go, and then so the best bet is to put it in the grant, then write it up and get it submitted for so when it's time for it to go to council, you've got your focus.
Which is 30 days before grant review. Okay, well, I think that's way more than I had thought of, and I really appreciate that. We have 1 minute left. We actually have 6 more examples, which we won't get to today, but we will potentially do this as a part 2. But are there any final thoughts or questions from the audience while we have these experts up? And I imagine at least 1 or 2 will be able to stick around afterwards. Yes?
Could maybe just comment on if it's like a kiss the death for the candidate, if there's like gaps in training.
Personally, I don't think so. I think you have an interesting story to tell there.
Personal statement of the biosketch?
Statement, if you took time off, you do something different. These days, there is like their possible trajectory to a science career. The only exception is I did once meet with someone who was age applying for an 32. I was thinking, tax dollar investment in your research career, I'm not sure about that. So that was a little curious. But short of that, I think you can fit nicely, make it compelling and exciting, go for it.
I don't think a lot of it depends on what you've done since that break. If, let's say, for whatever reason, you had a break, but then since that point in time, publications, and you've done X, Y, Z, and people, they're on a, that, whatever that was, different. And so it becomes less of an issue.
That's a good point. Well, sadly, we're out of time, but thank you so much, everyone, and please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. And since we talked about Ames so much, I'm really happy to tell you that next month we'll have a guest speaker talk about the specific Ames page, the most important page. So we'll see you then.